Okay, so we're going to get started here. My name is Corey Hagewood. I work here at PTS, and I'll be covering the Connect with Oracle webinar today. What we're going to go over today is a TracerPlus Connect connection to an Oracle database on one of our remote servers. And I'm going to cover the configuration of the ODBC driver in terms of how you would actually get that to connect, and then also the configuration that I've set up in the Connect using that driver. So to kind of start the webinar here, I'm just going to explain this very simple demo application that I've put together here. It's a very simple inventory application where you're just taking an inventory of items in your item list. So on our device already here, we have a few items in our item list, and this application, all it does is it'll just increment the quantities of these items as we scan them. So again, just to kind of demonstrate that very quickly, if we enter in the ID of an item here, and we select its room, we can increment its quantity by a certain amount here. And so it's going to record our transactions with our quantities and then also update our item list to reflect the new amount. So now that we kind of have the application in mind, we can start covering the Oracle setup and how we get things connecting to Oracle using the TracerPlus Connect software. So the first thing that you need to do when you want to connect to Oracle is that you need to create an entry in your ODBC Data Source Administrator in Windows using the Oracle driver to connect to that Oracle database. Now this Oracle driver, it depends on the version of Oracle that you're using. I believe in this demonstration I'm using 12C. But you can always find any one of these drivers on the Oracle website. And I believe it'll actually find the right one for you if you use the Oracle ODAC installer. That's ODAC installer, which again you can find on their website. So once you have that driver installed, you can then add new DSNs in your administrator using that. And remember, the TracerPlus Connect is always going to use the 32-bit version of the ODBC Data Source Administrator. And if you're on a 64-bit PC like I am, you can always find that here in this syswow64 folder. So once you've found the right Data Source Administrator and you have the driver installed, you can add your Oracle database as a data source. And so the way you would do that is that when you open up the Oracle driver, this is the window that you're going to see. And you can kind of call it whatever you want to call it. You can give it its own description. And the TNS server or service name, this drop down here, if this is populated, that means that you have your driver set up correctly and that you're getting your names in here. In order to get these names in here, you need to configure what's called a TNS names file, which you can find once you've installed the Oracle driver. You can find that TNS names Oracle file here in this directory. And all this really is it specifies which server you're connecting to and what port you're going to connect on. And then this information is what's used in that drop-down when you're connecting. If, for whatever reason, this file is configured the right way and your TNS names are still not showing up in this drop-down, you may have to create a system variable on your PC for the TNS admin, which it may not have gotten installed with the driver itself. But I would say that's more of a rare thing that you probably won't run into in your typical setup. So with that said, once you actually have the TNS name showing up in here and you've selected the one that you want to connect to, you can test that connection just by logging in with with your user account on the Oracle server. So I made myself an account here, and we're just going to test this to make sure that we've connected successfully. So once you've got that successful connection, you know that your driver itself is set up correctly. And then so now if we go over to the Connect software, we can take a look at how we would set things up in here. So I actually have two processes configured already. And these ones are for syncing data off the device. So what we can do is we can take a look at these, and then we can go through and create another process that would be handled for syncing data to the device. So just to kind of go over this, I'm sure you guys are familiar with Connect. But what we have here is we have TracerPlus as the source, and we have our Oracle demo app, which I have created in the desktop here, loaded in Connect. And what that's going to do is it's going to give us our field names on the left side. And then on the right side here, this is our destination. And what we've selected is that Oracle data source that we were just looking at in the administrator. So in terms of using Connect in Oracle, you always want to include a schema if you have one, because that's kind of what's going to determine what tables are returned when you're connecting. So in this case, my schema is the same as my username. It is possible to have a schema that's different than your username, but in this example, it is the same thing. And then, so what this is basically saying is, connect as user C Hagewood and return user C Hagewood tables, which I have 2 of in this connection. So again, just to kind of go through this, we can create a new profile here. And this profile we'll call sync data to the device. And we'll call this process update inventory list. And like our other processes that we had configured already, the only difference with this one is that our source is actually going to be that Oracle database from our ODBC administrator. So I'm going to select our Oracle DB demo here. I'm going to put in my schema. It's important to remember that the schema needs to be in all caps for this to work. And we're just going to log in here, and it's going to return our tables. Again, these tables themselves are restricted because of that schema. If for whatever reason you can't use a schema, there is a hidden feature in TracerPlus Connect called DSN filtering, which you can enable in one of the Connect source files. But it's kind of a manual process where you have to actually edit the XML of the system file to kind of include the tables that you want and ignore the tables that you don't need. But if you have questions about DSN filtering, you can always send us an email and we can explain to you how to do it. It is a little bit of a manual process, and I'm not going to cover it in this webinar, but it is an option that's out there if your schema is not going to cut it for limiting the amount of tables that you're returning in the drop-down there. So now that we've logged in and we've selected our table here of item list, we just have to choose our destination. So in this case, it's going to be TracerPlus. We want to attach our project again. Which will, again, return our field names down here. And we want to sync this to the inventory list session on our device, which is what's holding all that inventory information. One other setting that we're probably going to want to set here is the update existing append if not found option. All that's really going to do in our case is just make sure that our items are up to date and we don't get duplicate items in our inventory list. And so to do that, I'm using the update fields of item number and location to generate a unique key to update based off of. I think that's all we would really need for this this profile to get data to the device. So now we can actually go through on the device side of things and get things syncing across. So to do that, let's take a look at what we currently have in our database at this moment in time. So if we look at our inventory list, this data viewer here, this is viewing the contents of our item list table on our Oracle server. And right now we can see that we have 130 men's pants at stockroom 1. Now if we go to our device, we did make one transaction, and if you remember, I believe I added about 45 to that. So on the device here, we're actually sitting at men's pants with 175 quantity. So at this point, we'd actually want to sync these over to the Oracle database. And we can do that here using the sync button, which I've configured on my form. This sync button, it has a host ID of the Connect server here, my PC's IP address, and then the profile ID on this sync button is 1, meaning it's going to run both the sync transactions and the sync inventory process. So if this works correctly, what this should do is it should update our quantity to 175 in this table, and it should add that transaction that we made with the 45 quantity received in the transactions table. So let's give it a try and see what happens here. Okay, so it looks like we got the sync completed here on the device. And if we refresh our tables here, we can see that the quantity is now 175 on the pants, and that we should have an additional record here in the transaction. So at this point, I have synced to the Oracle database and made the edits that I made on the device. If we were to make some edits on the database itself, we could then sync those over to the device with the second profile, but we have to make a button that runs that. Currently, the second profile that we created earlier in the webinar, it can't be activated by this button. So if we go back to our desktop project here, what we can do is we can make a copy of this button here, and we can just change the description, and we can change the profile that it activates. So let's call this one Update Device. And all we need to do here is just switch the profile ID to 2, indicating that we should activate our second profile, which will essentially update the data on the device from the database. Again, the host ID, just to show that really quick, is going to be the IP address of my Connect machine, which is this private address here. In this case, I'm connecting on the default port 4403. Okay, so we have our new button now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to deploy this to the device to get that change on there. And then I'm going to boot up my, my SQL developer application to just make some edits on the actual data in the database. And then what we can do is, using the profile that we've set up, we can sync those changes over to the device. So I think I have that here. And so this SQL developer, this is an application from Oracle that you can use to connect to your Oracle install, and edit data, create tables, and do things like that. So I'm just going to use this to edit some of the data in our tables. So we want to go to our item list table here, and we'll take a look at the data. And so again, this is the same data that's showing up in our Connect View Data tab here. So any edits we make to this data should come over in this tab. So in this case, let's add a new item to our list. Let's maybe try adding a pair of shoes and we'll put that in stockroom 2. And so we can do that here with the SQL developer. We'll do a insert, and we'll call this 126. This is going to be men's shoes, stockroom 2. And let's say we have 30 of them here. So I'm going to commit that change to my Oracle database. It should save that insert here. And if we refresh the database here in Connect, we can see that we have our shoes now. So what we can do now is on our device, remember we created that new sync button. And so if we go into our inventory session here, we're going to have this update device button, which should sync over the men's shoes record. And just to show that, that is not currently in our item list, but it should be once we run our sync. So I'm just going to hit the update device button here. It's going to connect and run our one process, which is going to update the device. So if we take a look back in our item list here, we should see the shoes as well, which came directly from the Oracle database. And then now that we have it on the device, again, we can edit its quantities here. I believe it was 126. We can say stockroom 2. And then we have a quantity of, say, another 50. And then if we sync this up with the database again, this should increase the quantity from 30 to 80, adding that additional 50. So again, this is just a very basic inventory application, essentially showing how you can sync to and from Oracle using that ODBC driver, which is really the most critical part. Again, remembering that once you have it set up in here, you can then use this connection to kind of connect into Oracle. And that pretty much sums up the Oracle demonstration for today.